on. Okay, I hope that works.
It said recording in progress, though.
Right, right. So start from your end. I know that you're a big deal. I know that I'm talking to somebody who is a big deal.
No.
Um,
Oh gosh, where do I even start? Well, I guess I'll just start with names. Just let's go make it easy. My name is Len Harris. I go by Len, just to make it simple. I was a shift supervisor at Starbucks Coffee Company, and I started the organizing process at my store last December. So December of 2021, I decided to organize my store. Because I was sick of witnessing the way the company was exploiting our labor. And this took a lot of time for me to recognize. It took time for me to assess my own biases with society and what have you. But I am now 31 years old, and I've been in the workforce since I was 14. So like 15-ish, 16 years to really, I guess 17 mathematically, gives you plenty of time to really see these patterns, especially like when you don't, when aspects of either nepotism or like good networking or luck work together, and you get like a really good job out of college, you're going to enter into a lot of those positions that are going to be pretty severely disrespected and underpaid and devalued and what have you. And of course, you don't think of it that way when you first get into it. A lot of people don't, because they don't recognize the very exploitative, parasitic, non-sustainable nature of capitalism. So once I started recognizing those patterns, and I finally realized that like there is a way you can combat these things, and it's unionizing, which is a really difficult process, but like it's that or continue on doing what you're doing. I decided I might as well make change. So many people do what's known as well as many other names too, performative activism. And like I totally was one of those people who like fell into that performative activism sort of bubble, where like you think you're doing something by sharing something on social media. Like, yeah, you may be a step ahead of the game in the sense where you recognize these are issues, because a lot of people won't recognize that these are issues, like the exploitation of our labor and the inherent, climate change perpetuated by capitalism and what have you. But just posting about it online doesn't really do much. So I decided to actually take action. And here we are a year later, and my store held its first ever considered strike on Red Cup Day, and the next day I was fired. So I was able to start the first ever, I was able to help lead the first ever unionized Starbucks in Colorado, which is really a cool accomplishment. I'm very proud of myself to be able to do that, but it is pretty indicative of how desperately these corporations don't want us to take action. They don't want us to arrest our rights into our own hands, because once you actually do that and you pull back the curtain, you start to really see how terrible it is and how deeply ingrained it is in the individual of this, like, this aspect of our society that's just so, they want to get blood from a stone from us. Like they want to bleed us dry.
pervasive.
It's everywhere. It's literally everywhere. And
It's capitalist realism. We're
yeah, no, yeah, exactly.
in
Everyone's
it.
just like they share these dystopian memes everywhere, and they're just like late stage capitalism. And it's like
Right.
everyone's laughing because otherwise you'd be crying, because it's just true. So yeah, that's basically who I am. I guess you could say a person who found out a little bit later than maybe I wanted to about capitalism, which sounds so silly to say, and who really wants to not actually perpetuate the cycle of abuse that has maintained this capitalist agenda for so long. Because we're going to be in a situation of don't look up, and don't look up is supposed to be like hyperbole, satirical, but like obviously,
But we're at that point
but we're at that point.
where he breaks down and he yells into the camera and he's like,
yes, I know.
And you always have those friends that want you to be like, well, some say the meteor is a good thing because of this. And it's like,
I know. Yeah.
So I feel like that I don't really have much to say about myself. My name is Stephen Wallace. I'm a volunteer for Sunrise Movement, and I've been on the left for as long as I've been an adult.
Mm.
I have personal reasons for that. I have uh, educated reasons for that. I have emotional reasons for that. I have human reasons for
I was just about to say, I you mean a human.
that.
Yeah.
And it's the one thing for me, just the left wing is through all permutations of my life, even falling away from it in a serious sense, where it's a way of looking at the world that makes sense to me morally, and
Mhm.
I've never been able to shake that. It really hits me at the core, and
Yeah.
never going to walk away from it, never. So
Yeah.
that's where I am, and I just I'm just trying to connect people at this point. I
Yeah.
feel like people in Sunrise Movement, who are right now, where they're having an in-person hooray after years of, and I'm happy for them.
Mhm.
Feel like this is uh it's going to be a surprise to be like, hey, look at this, because we've all talked about talking to somebody from anything in the Starbucks union wave, and
Yeah.
I was like, why don't we just why don't we just do it? And so I then emailed, and here we are, right?
Yeah.
um but I'm not going to pretend that I'm in the same league at all here,
Oh my gosh.
uh
It the idea of, I understand where you're coming from, and I'm very flattered, but honestly, I think like people really just need to better understand how we as a society are going to form solidarity with each other, even with people that we may not fully agree with, like as because I mean, nationwide solidarity, I think, is one of the only things. Like, it's not the only thing, but it's one of the only things that's really gonna change pace. And that's, I mean, that's one of the reasons why our society is so bent on getting us back into isolated places, back into a workflow, back into a system of day in and day out where
right.
we just don't have time or
Everything
energy
before
or
the
money.
pandemic, everything
Yes.
before the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
Forget what you know, forget what you thought
Hmm.
about.
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. It's this breakneck pace of getting people back to where they were so that, they're too tired to exert energy into anything other
We
than,
got to get back to exploitation.
yeah.
We
Yeah,
have
no,
to get back
exactly.
to exploitation.
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah. True. Very,
Uh,
very sad. And like they want to make these things different. Like they want to make the fight for climate action and climate change a separate fight from the labor movement. And it just isn't. Like it just isn't. Like they may have like different paths, but the paths are like right next to each other.
well, that's why
um,
the Green New Deal as a politic,
mhm.
not just Sunrise Movement, but as a whole politic, the Green New Deal as a notion kind of articulates that,
Yeah.
begins to articulate that, and
Yeah.
that's why this is so crucial.
Yeah.
But where further do you see connections between the two?
I mean, I've been talking about this a lot where like, I mean, one of the most things that one of the most well-known things I think people would probably recognize is the fact that uh, approximately 100 corporations are responsible for like 70-80% of the world's emissions. And if that's the case, then that means the output of those corporations and the subsequent labor that's backed up behind them is part of this problem. And so I've been talking about, on top of just like how that is affiliated with climate change. It's just these corporations which need labor, like they do, in order to thrive, is responsible for these for this big portion of climate change. Um, Another part of it is just there are these clauses that I've been reading about where you can work into union contracts that basically say that the company needs to ensure like the safety and the well-being of their employee, and that extends to the subsequent environment of that employee outside of the workplace. Because if they have an environment that is unsustainable and an environment that's ultimately going to lead to their death or whatever, then that employee is not going to be able to work.
Right.
And so therefore these clauses that could be written into these union contracts can basically hold these companies accountable for whatever percentage, like the significant percentage of emissions, be it in terms of pollution or carbon emissions, which I mean, they're all the same thing ultimately, but like, you know, there's different ways in which they can attribute to it. It holds them accountable for those things because that is by and large affecting the environment of their employee, and it's going to make these environments uninhabitable. Um, so I mean, it's kind of like they're inevitably connected. And if we're going to change anything about it, we have to draw attention to that connection and make reparations for it. Um,
Okay.
so,
Yeah, that makes sense.
mhm.
I think one of the one second, it just washes over you, right? It,
Mhm.
it just washes. I mean, I'm pretty sure you're used to the situation, even as somebody who's been involved in movement politics, is immersed in it. You still talk about it, and you still get that situation where somebody goes, "Okay, let's do something else, or let's think about something else."
Yeah. Mhm.
um, I think that and this is the problem that we have to work on is
Mhm.
there, and people have had different takes on it. There's a kind of okay article by some guy from, I think, what's called the Breakthrough Institute.
Yeah.
The title is real nice. I don't agree with some of the analysis, but the subject was blue collars, green jobs, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
and so what does it mean to deepen a concept of a green working class? And
Right.
how do we bring class consciousness into the environmental movement,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm. I
Um,
mean, that is a difficult question, or that's a difficult thing to. It's difficult and it's not difficult at the same time. And I think that's the part that kind of makes it like funny and annoying at the same. It's like it's actually not that hard, but like we know how slow we move, so like it is hard. Um, but the most affected people by climate change are the most poor, the most vulnerable. And that doesn't mean that like people who do have a lot of wealth are never going to be affected by climate change. I mean, we know that to be untrue already, but like um, I think a lot of people just assume that if you are pushing for climate action and especially the Green New Deal, that you hate blue collar workers and you hate like the work that they stand for. And it's like it's frustrating to hear that because not only is that untrue, but like a lot of blue collar workers have come forward to say like I don't want to work in coal, but I have no transitional like there's no way for me to transition out of coal. We don't actually have like decent foundational jobs and infrastructure in jobs that surround green energy yet. We just don't have that. And there's just so much money in oil and gas and coal and stuff like that, that like, yeah. So ultimately it's like there are so many people who are trying to prevent this transitional um, movement from fossil fuel energy into renewable energy are using the same people who are taken advantage of in the first place as like a an argument piece and then totally discarding them after they've made their argument, and it's like they themselves don't even want to be where they're at. So like it's like it's frustrating, it's difficult, you have to work around these psychological
it,
barriers
it's kind of
to say
a
the least.
the argument persists because there's a myth about, let's say, white working class or
Hmm.
whatever, that they're gonna veer to the right socially, that they're gonna veer to the right
Right.
economically, that they're duped, that they're you
Yeah.
know, Trump style populists. I don't like using that word these days, but
Yeah.
populists or whatever. And what you've just put forward is, hey, look, they know what's going on, but
Yeah, they're not stupid.
we need options.
Yeah. Yeah.
we
Yeah,
need
it's
we need options, right?
mhm. And yeah, I mean, I've read this really incredible passage from there's an article called Three Cheers for Socialism, and it's a pretty wordy article, honestly. It's a little it's like purple prose in a way, but it makes a really good point where it says that Americans are the most like thoroughly and passively indoctrinated peoples on the planet. Like we know next to nothing about the histories of social movements that have come and gone in our society. Like we certainly don't know anything about social movements in other countries. There's a lot of there's just so many things about our the way the system works and the way our society functions that we have been purposely not taught, and therefore either have to discover, unfortunately, as like, for an example, so many people in my generation, the millennial generation, were bottlenecked into college because that was the whole like get a college degree, you're going to up your chances for a
Right.
better job.
Here's
Yep. And
how it
it was
works. Right.
an absolute lie. Like, it was a full ass lie. Like, it was just not true. And so many people going into college, not really knowing what they want to do, but whatever, at least I have a degree, are now getting into these, you know, entry level positions. And I use entry level with air quotes, because like every single job has its parts that are difficult. And so many people who are not in an entry level position have been taught and coerced, passively and otherwise, to look down on people in entry level positions and act as though it's their fault that they're in this place, when that is absolutely where they have been like corralled into. And that's the whole beast of it all, is fighting against not only your own internalized self-hatred of like, my failure is my fault, or like, you know, I'm not wealthy and that's my fault. And then it's just, yeah. So
What did I do to
there's
deserve this? Right.
exactly. There's so many moving parts in this sort of this indoctrination that we experience. It's more than just some evil person twiddling their mustache and implementing a machine they can press a button and it indoctrinates us. It's so many different levels. It's you at yourself, it's your coworker at yourself, it's your mom and your dad, it's your brother, it's your sister, it's your neighbor, it's your employer. There's so many levels of, you know, keep
Well,
your head down,
that
don't fight the status quo.
right. Well, have your consent manufactured, as it were. Right.
Yes, yes,
Um,
yes, yes. Love the cage you're in.
Wow. um, so you guys just got a shout out from Bernie Sanders for the 1 year, right?
We did. Hmm.
And one thing that comes to mind, hearing everything you're saying, um, and taking that, congratulations, by the way, you know,
Thank you.
um, is that Bernie is one of the public figures, even even distinct from, like, say, the Squad and other kind of like progressive Democrats,
Hmm.
insofar as he is unafraid to say the words class war.
Hmm. Yes.
And
Yeah.
I feel like this is distinct from even say Sunrise Movement, where there's a kind of background knowledge of the existence of this thing among a, a like a web of other things.
Yeah.
But I think that the the Starbucks thing and any working class movement generally is going to put this reality of class war out front.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if you can speak to that a little bit.
I mean, we're already seeing class warfare with inflation. I mean, he's just calling it as it is. Obviously, I don't think any one person is perfect. Like, that's not the point of being a public servant. It's to serve the public and to pay attention to what the public needs. So like, yes, I do love Bernie Sanders as a person who is significantly more left leaning, politically speaking, and I think he's absolutely speaks his mind, and he's true in this instance. But I think people need to better understand that, like, it's not his ideal he's putting out there. He's just illuminating a truth that a very affluent and influential aspect of our society does not want us to know.
Right.
And there's always been class warfare. Class warfare has literally been the point of the American dream from the beginning. Like, you would not have the American dream of succeeding with the white picket fence if you did not have a subsequent proletariat who's exploited that you're trying to get away from. Like that, there is no distinctification. There, you cannot distinct rich unless you have poor. Um,
Right.
so
Right.
so yes, I 100% agree that class warfare is something that is happening. It's always been happening, but it's a lot more obvious now. And especially, like I said, with inflation, quote unquote, like, I mean, I have a friend who just visited from Italy who was absolutely blown away, like, had no idea how bad the inflation was until they got a Starbucks latte, a small Starbucks latte for like $6.50. And they were like, I can get this for an equivalent of 95 American cents in Italy. Like, same quality, same whatever, you know. And of
Wow.
course, those are two different countries. I understand they're not completely comparable, when it comes to or comparable rather, when it comes to those things. But like, I mean, everybody's talking about how groceries are too expensive now. Everybody's talking about how the rent is too high. Everybody's talking about, like, and who's going to be the most affected by this? People who are already living paycheck to paycheck. Like, they've taken a pay cut because of this. Like, it's not like they actually could take a physical pay cut. Like, let's, you know, I made 19 an hour, for an example. and some change. And it's not like I suddenly went from 19 to 17 an hour, but all the prices raised by 10%. I didn't get a 10% raise though.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, so it's one of those things where people are looking for like super smoking, like smoking gun evidence. They're looking for a crime scene to be like, there it is, the evidence of class warfare. And it's never going to be that overt. It's always going to depend on people being too busy and too tired and too exploited to actually pay attention to these patterns of exploitation.
Right. It's all there, but
Yeah,
you're not going to
exactly.
carry on a research project after working 12 hours.
No, no, exactly. And that in and of itself is class warfare. Like people are looking. I read this really incredible book called White Fragility, and it talked about how white people will really uphold white solidarity even against their better judgment because they don't want to make white people uncomfortable. Like they don't want to make people uncomfortable, so they won't call out the racism. They won't call out, that kind of stuff. And I read this really incredible part of it that was talking about how did it go? It was like so racism to a lot of white people seems like murder. It needs to be an act in order for it to exist. And that's just not what it is. And it's
Right.
the same thing with class warfare. They're looking for an act, like a heinous, egregious, very obvious act of violence and hatred for it to be real. And it's
Right.
just
Like a trigger point, something
exactly. And
something easy. Right.
exactly. And it's just not. It is not. It's subtle. I mean, uh, not that I want to compare something as horrible as this, but like when you think about the Holocaust, they look as to how that happened. How did something so horrible happen? And they said 1/3 of the population, of course, this is walnut, like very simple breakdown, but 1/3 of the population wanted to kill the other third, and the final third just ignored it, ignored the signs, ignored, like they just wanted nothing to do with it.
Right.
And that's how it happened. And it's like, I'm sorry. I'm sorry you don't want to acknowledge class warfare. I'm sorry you don't want to do the heavy lifting of like considering your own exploitation. But like, if you want things to change, if you want to help, you gotta take the step of acknowledging, truth and reconciliation, even as the Christians say.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah.
Well, you would think maybe this is a a Zoom call in itself. This is a 3-hour thing, right? But
Mhm.
you would think that Christian values would naturally result in a left-wing ideology or
Yeah.
something like that.
I mean, Jesus is a brown Middle Eastern hippie. So like
Right.
who like a lot of people joke that he's trans because he was conceived like through holy matrimony, so to speak, or not. What was it? He was, it was holy conception or something like that. So he doesn't have any chromosomes. He technically would only have XX chromosomes, but he's still a he. So anyway, just a joke that the trans community likes to talk about. But I'm like, hey, they've got a point. Biologically, they have a point.
We'll clip this part out. This will be on one of the shorts or something like
Yeah.
that.
But yeah, no, exactly. You think that would lean more left. I mean, I always joke about how the fandom Jesus is so much is really not cool. Like he's fandom Jesus, the Jesus that the fandom of Jesus has created is not cool. But canon Jesus, real Jesus, and his actual scriptures, he's cool.
That's good. I'm gonna
He's a cool
remember
guy.
that. That's really good.
He whips rich people. Like, do you really think? Anyway, it's just really funny how I have loving, wealthy family
Mhm.
who are very Christian themselves, and it's just very funny to like see
Well,
the
they kind of missed
dissonance.
the flipping tables part.
Yeah. Oh my. Yeah. Anyway, it's interesting. It's interesting the picking and the choosing and the confirmation bias in religion everywhere.
Can you
Not just
talk to
religion,
me
but
a little bit about? Oh my God, we could talk forever, man. Could, could you can you talk to me a little bit about the process of getting a union together? How has it been to organize? What does it mean to keep morale up? What does it mean to build a union and to
Mm,
maintain that kind of political solidarity? What does it mean to begin to struggle?
good question. Big question. So how I started the union at my store, or how I started organizing for it, was first, of course, I had to really familiarize myself with what it was to be a union. Because as a person who grew up in the way that I grew up, I don't know if it's super well known among everybody who knows me, but my close friends obviously know this because it's just inevitable that they would know this. But I came from a very right wing family. My family is very conservative Republican. I don't actually really care to to ask them nowadays what their strong affiliation is, because they know that I have since completely divided. I'm like, no, I'm not there anymore.
Right.
And they want to be a loving, supportive family. So we don't discuss it as frequently probably as we should, but it's unfortunately a very emotional argument for them. And it's difficult for me as a person who's affected by their politics directly. But I had to basically test and address my own privileges and biases as I was looking into what it meant to form a union, because I had been brought up thinking all unions were bad and they were taking advantage of a corporation, and the union was just established to further take advantage of the workers and just get their
Big
dues.
union. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And like, of course there are unions that need work, like, to say the least. I mean, the teachers union unfortunately is not nearly as good as it should be. Our educators are not at all valued the way that they should be in society. And contrarily, the police union is ridiculous and needs to be checked. So yeah, it's just funny too how like right when people are like unions are awful, and I'm like, how do you feel about police? And they're usually
Right.
like, I love a police, and I'm like, yeah, it's the strongest union in America. Anyway,
Right.
so so once you start to assess your own bias and really think maybe I'm wrong, like maybe I should. It's so much easier to kind of pick through information when you kind of consider maybe I've been influenced, right? And once you get there, once you kind of go through your whole personal metamorphosis, which sounds like I'm simplifying it, I am not. I mean, I had to recognize I was queer in a very Catholic, homophobic society. It's a big undertaking for me. But once you really start to familiarize yourself with it and understand like what it is to form a union, I think what's really best is to instill that the person, like the employee, the individual, has that power, because otherwise it'll be so easy for them to get bulldozed, either by the employer, which is significantly more likely to happen than by the union. But it's possible too that there are unions that do take advantage of things, and we have to talk about that. But it's important, of
But
course,
I
to
I feel like that kind of corruption is
Mhm.
something that there's, like there's movements within working working class movements to reform unions.
Yes, yes, as they should be. Everything should revisit.
So union reform is, that's something that's already
Right.
in the
And that
conceptual lexicon.
exactly. So right then and there, you have the admittance that like nothing is perfect. Like I talked about this earlier, nothing is perfect. You may have the best intentions, but that doesn't mean that everything is going to be up in a contract the way it should be. So for me, when I was forming it, I basically just drew attention to the things that were not right. And that made it very easy because it was like, hey, did you notice that Starbucks made $45,000 this weekend from our store? Cool. Um, do you want to talk about how much you made as an individual at this store this week? And it's like, pennies in comparison, right? And it's like, you were the one that was making the coffee and keeping the store open and helping it flow and helping, you know, all this stuff. And then once you start, you know, people who work these positions, people who actually are empathetic and or sympathetic, even if they haven't worked these positions, but oftentimes people who work these positions, they start to recognize how much work they are and how this whole like looking down on people in entry level positions is actually like awful. It's a terrible, horrible thing to do. It's like, sorry, I'm just thinking about how capitalism literally encourages people to be brutal and
It's
exploitative.
yeah, it
And
rewards violence.
yes, it rewards violence. Exactly. And so once you really start to point out that people are taking advantage of, and I mean, my partner said it best that like psychologically, so many people have learned to wear their exploitation as a badge of honor. Like, I worked 70 hours this week with no breaks. Cool, you're exploited. And that shouldn't be the case. Like, you shouldn't have to do that. And especially seeing as, your CEO probably makes $3 billion a year or $3 million a year. Like, I don't think people even. So one of the thought exercises I like to do, because I think we can talk all day about these big concepts of how capitalism is bad, and we can bring some numbers here and there to like be like, see, look how bad it is, right? But I think a lot of it is people just don't have good anchors. They don't have good, like, when you hear the word billion, you hear it all the time. So you can't really, over time, you can't conceptualize how big a billion is. And so what I like to do, I do little thought exercises with people about how much money these companies are making and how much they're not giving back to their workers who are helping make that money. And so the little exercise that I do is um, approximately how long is 1 million seconds? And I usually I'll pose that question to whoever I'm talking to. So, I'll pose it to you. Let's do this that exercise. So, Stephen, can you guess
I
if
think I
you
know this one. I think I
yeah,
know
if you
this
do.
one.
I've done it before. So
Ready? A
so
million
approximately
seconds is like 11 days, and
yes,
then a billion seconds is like 31 years, right?
33.
33. All right.
Yeah, approximately 33, 31 to 33. So you're right. So exactly, like you think 1 million seconds, like you make $1 million a year. That's 11 days. Like, what do you think seconds? One, two, like one Mississippi, two Mississippi. That's fast, easy. Boom, 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 boom. 11 days of that. And then just 1 billion is 32 years, a median of 32 years. That's crazy. That amount of difference.
I haven't even been alive that long yet.
No, yeah, exactly. So anyway, so I started just doing things like that, like pointing out really obvious stuff that was just like, if we actually kept up with, if wage increases kept up with inflation, we'd be at like $30 to $33 an hour.
Right.
Like
And now we have to fight for 15.
yeah, exactly. And once you really start to lay it out, when you're like, hey, actually, if the wages kept up with inflation, which is what they had been doing back when the extremely wealthy were taxed adequately, we would be at like it was like a 28 to 32 minimum wage. We have places in the country that are still at 7 fucking 25. Excuse me, but like
I know it. I know
yeah.
it.
So that's ultimately what I started doing, and the reason why I kind of started really deep and like would really get people thinking is because I was fired, and they've been trying to get our store to like perform some actions, and it's been difficult for them to really bulk up this sort of organization and the momentum and the morale, like you said, it has difficulty keeping morale up to perform these actions while I'm gone. And I that was their intention. That was their intention with firing me, was to put a chokehold on our union efforts at our store.
Right.
And
Take the
certainly
take her out.
exactly take her
Yeah.
back, bring her behind the chemical shed kind of thing.
Whoa!
I know, metaphorically speaking, not literally, obviously, but so and of course these things work. They do work. People get scared. It surprises them. But because I took that time to really lay the foundational groundwork, even though the actions may not have been as, they're not going to be as, because people are like, okay, I'm a little scared that happened, and that was the intention of the company.
They've been intimidated.
They've been intimidated, but foundationally now they're not like, oh, I'm just scared. They're like, I'm scared and I'm pissed because I know what you're doing. Like, I know that you're doing this to scare me, and it is working, like in the sense that I'm scared, but I know better now. And the more it happens, so I've already laid that foundational work of like making it obvious, these contradictions that this Starbucks, great example. I worked for them. I can speak about them comfortably. They tout themselves as this incredible progressive conglomerate, right? They're this amazing.
It's their brand.
It's their brand. I mean, literally, it's a whole thing, and they're not even living their own values. Like, one of their biggest, like, they have like 6 store values that they post everywhere or whatever, and like one of them is like, we nurture the human spirit, blah blah blah. We operate through the lens of humanity. One of them is challenge this. We encourage our partners to challenge status quo, and it's like, when you actually, that's what. Must I say more?
That's
Must
like
I say
Steve
more?
Jobs. That's like think different, right? Like
I know. Oh my God, I know. So once you actually draw attention and bring to light the contradictions in their statements and the obvious lip service that these companies like Starbucks, and even like, some companies are straight up about it. They're like, we don't care about our workers. We just want to make money. And it's like, at least you're honest. Like, at least you're honest about it. At least you're not hedging with us. But like,
right.
once you bring out the obvious contradictions in their statements, people start to understand. Like, when I was fired, I had a coworker, a few of them actually, send me a few messages, like text me and be like, I never would have stood up for my rights. I never would have thought to do this until you were my part, like you were a partner of mine. And I can never thank you for these tools that you gave me, which is very flattering. And obviously it's really satisfying to be part of this, which I actually wrote how I was journaling the other day about it. And I was like, a true sense of satisfaction, I feel, is arguably anti-capitalist, because that's what they want to withhold from you is satisfaction. So you keep going and going and going and going. I mean, think about the infinite scrolls on social media. It's meant to trigger dopamine. It's meant to make you feel good, but you never get that serotonin, that sense of satisfaction. I'm good, I'm done. They don't want that, because
Right.
then you're not going to pay money. You're not going to
Because
pay
you don't need
time.
anything anymore.
You're not going to sacrifice convenience, like for your things for convenience. Exactly. Exactly. So this feeling, the sense of satisfaction that I'm getting from this, like my direct efforts have resulted in this change. It it's something that can't be taken away, and that's something that I think they're really scared of people getting a sense of community and satisfaction from this, because it'll illuminate that life isn't just about the numbers. Life isn't just about consumption and margin and profit. And I mean, it should be obvious, because so many of these people who make this much money are miserable.
Right.
um they're miserable people, and it's like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Nowhere in there is their money, and yet that's all they care about, and they are miserable.
Right.
So yeah, so in a nutshell, I talk to people about these things. I brought to attention these issues with work. I did make it a little more personal. I didn't go super esoteric, but like I would talk about these things, because even if it's something that doesn't really resonate with them until 5 years from now, when they've been in the workforce for a decent chunk of time, they're going to remember this. They're going to remember, shit, she was fucking right. I've been in this workforce for, I was 19 when I first worked with this crazy lender person at Starbucks, and now I'm 26. And it's, I mean, I hope to God things will get better in time, but like, so I just kind of tried to speak to the truth of the matter, and eventually people just fell into this. I wish I had a better, a brochure that was just like, follow these bullet points and you'll get people in your union. And like, there are ways to do that. Talk to them about it, ask them what they're interested in, bring forth, the contradictions of the company, show the pros and cons of unionizing, and how, a significant percentage of people make like 35% more than non-unionized workers on average. Like there are a bunch of statistical pros everywhere, measurable, that unions by and large really, really help people um, live better, happier, healthier, more enriched lives, because our society is about money. But beyond all that, I think really what I did was just talk to the heart of the matter, because I'm with you. We have to really talk about being anti-capitalist. Like I feel like at some point in time, people who say the word anti-capitalism could be hunted down. Like it's that, like, how dare you suggest that? But that's what it is. It's like, I'm humanitarian. I'm about focusing on the well-being of like, I'm literally about the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Like,
Genuinely, I mean it.
genuinely about this. It's
Right.
not about money. Like, I understand that our society is totally centered around money, and money get you resources, which is the happiness. It's not the money, it's the resources it gets you. It's the time it grants you, it's the peace and the luxury it can grant you, it's the health it can afford you, it's the clothes that can afford you. It's the, like, money, it's not the money, it's the resources. And so when we strip away those aspects of it, like, what actually are we trying to do? What's the actual point of life? And like, if you have a lot of money but you are a miserable, sad little goon, like, what kind of existence is that?
Right.
So, I don't know. I think when you really bring to light these issues, people start to see a bigger picture that they can't ignore. Like, they can't ignore that it's a selfish thing to just want money for the sake of it, and they can't ignore that people who have a lot of money often aren't happy. So
I
what does
would
that
hope
mean?
that it opens the door for them to go even further. It's like
That's what I would hope.
now that we have these kinds of protections, or even a decent workplace. um, I think Richard Wolff talked about Chipotle was getting shut down when people would strike, and then the city would buy the Chipotles, and then they would become worker-owned enterprises or something like
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
And so I wouldn't imagine that everybody in the in the Starbucks union movement would be trying to see trying to seize all Starbucks. I mean, I would love that
Yeah,
person.
I know. A lot of
Um,
people talked about Starbucks co-op,
right.
and I
And
was like, oh,
so
I'd love that idea.
right. Oh, okay. So it's something that's people have talked about a little bit.
We've talked about it very briefly. I think it's like one of those little tiny baby steps at a time. We'll see. But I
I mean,
think
that's the dream, you know?
I know, I know. I mean, literally, seize the means of production. That's what a co-op is literally just a bunch of people owning one thing. So it's not just one or two or a handful of people profiting off of this huge network and off of other people's labor. It's all these people profiting off of their own labor.
Right.
Um, yeah, it's kind of, yeah. The sky is blue. No, it isn't. That's what it feels like every time. God.
How do you feel in the wake of being fired? What comes for you now? Are you going to keep doing talks like this? I mean,
Absolutely. Um, I feel great. I'm not gonna lie. I feel fantastic. And like I mean, I feel awful for my store. Don't get me wrong. I know that this was a big blow for them and it's scary for them. So honestly, I'm speaking from a oddly oddly privileged perspective for having been fired. Because there are people, I have coworkers too, if they were fired, they wouldn't be able to afford their insulin. So like I speak from a very privileged perspective. Not every single person who has been let go can say what I say. And a lot of that is because I did put a lot of efforts into the movement. So a lot of people who have my back, which is awesome. Like it's, this is a mutual aid sort of thing. But I do have family that a lot of people don't have that are also there to help me out. So I just need to illuminate that like yes, I did put efforts into helping build like a safety net for myself, but no person can do it alone.
no,
And this whole individualism, this whole aspect of individualism and being individualistic in our society is detrimental to our the well-being and the maintenance and the vitality of our species. It just is. Like we're a community species. We're supposed to work together. Like I literally just watched a thing the other day about school and how school is like antithetical to all things of survival. It's like when you're taking tests, do it alone, do not cooperate. Like you need to take care of this by yourself. Don't ask questions. If you make a mistake, you're wrong, you get points off. Like so nobody can make a mistake. Nobody is going to ask questions. Like if anything, it doesn't create a well-learned, educated person. It creates a good employee who's not going to ask questions, who's not going to step out of line.
create somebody
Like
who's ready to do what they're told, right?
right.
Yeah.
So in the wake of being fired, it's kind of like I've been telling my coworkers for months that I knew I was going to get fired. So when it happened, I was like, there, see, I knew this was going to happen. So yes, it was devastating to my store and they hated it, but it was another one of those like Alendra said this was going to happen. Like Len said they were going to fire her and lo and behold, they did. So like Len knows what she's talking about. I don't know what I'm talking about all the time, but I at least know what I'm talking about here. And so it kind of set in motion like the truth of the matter, which is this company's not our friend. It's not actually going to respect us enacting our rights and unionizing and striking. It's not going to say, hey, we fired you for striking because they can't do that, but they're going to find other ways to get rid of people who are insurgent or inspire this sense of individualism or community rather.
Right.
Someone who inspires a sense of individual action to bring the community together, that kind of thing. So I'm fighting the firing, the termination. I've already submitted the paperwork. So I have an
You've
attorney.
got a strike fund going.
Yeah, I do have a strike fund going. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's almost fulfilled. It's awesome. I'm super super fortunate. I have I want to say it's like 600 shy of being fully funded, which is really incredible, and I cannot thank the community enough. Again, I could not have done it alone. But I am fighting the termination. I'm taking several measures to do it. I'm doing an appeal process with the company. I'm actually fighting it in court, so I have an attorney already filing for it. Yeah, so I have like multiple. I might as well, it's like I might as well fight it because if I get reinstated, then I get back pay. So like, there's
Oh,
that.
nice.
Yeah. So if I get reinstated, there's back pay because it's a wrongful termination and they can find that I was wrongfully terminated for union activity. I don't know if that will be the ruling or if I'll even get it back. I hope so because it was a wrongful firing and it absolutely was disguised to be, my own fault when it was because I was involved with the union, but that's another story. Sort of. And if I don't, I mean, like I've already been talking to a lot of people about this. Like they wanted it to be a silencing act for me and it just wasn't. Like if anything, it made me louder because now I'm talking to a bunch of people about them doing this, and it's drawing even more attention to the movement and the campaign of unionizing. So I'm doing well. Things are underway for me to get my job back, and even if I don't get my job back, it doesn't matter. Like I'm good. Like I'm good. I have plenty to offer. Like that was the thing too, is Starbucks likes to look down on its workers, but frankly, most of the workers that are there are like overqualified to be there. Most people are actually overqualified for their positions. They want their
Just
employer to not think that they are. But
right,
so it's kind of one of those things where it's like Starbucks really thinks it's doing something when it lets its partners go. And it's just like, okay, that was a bad decision.
right.
But so yeah, ultimately they kind of hurt themselves in the long run.
Definitely,
But
definitely. There's how are we doing for time?
I'm fine.
Oh my God, you are awesome. So there are two directions that I want to take this.
Yeah.
One of them goes in the direction of kind of official politics and representation in elections, and the other one goes in putting this very particular, very popular struggle in the context of the rail strike and everything else
Mm,
that is kind of going on in the context of anti-capitalist movement
yeah.
and working class movement.
Mhm.
So I know in Sunrise Movement, love it or hate it, there's an understandable push that we played a part in getting the vote out for the midterms. That was a lot of our thing. When Herschel Walker was, hooray, he's
Yeah.
not hooray. We did the whole thing where you phone bank and everything else. Um, it seems like, of course, when we're talking about the success of something that you're doing, um, you know, I don't want to give Biden credit, but at least he is someone who might uh, understand the what it is. I don't want whatever.
I know. It's well,
But the point is that the reason that movements can come to the fore is because uh, you're doing something that people can understand, right?
yeah.
So what's the role of representatives in this, or do we even need that kind of support or endorsement?
I honestly, so need is a word. That's a tricky word in my opinion because like I don't know if we would need it necessarily, but I feel like it would certainly act as a catalyst to the situation, and time is of the essence.
Mhm.
So like I think the unfortunate thing is we have this very strange society. I guess it's not that strange. It's just the way the society is, where we really idolize people. We make a celebrity or an idol out of these people. I mean, like, why do you think TikTok is so popular? So many people are so uncertain about their future, and there is really, like, especially economically speaking, it's bleak to say the least. So the only people nowadays who are like really getting anywhere in anything are celebrities.
Right.
It's people who society upholds or uplifts or sees in the news or the media or tabloids or magazines or
That's
TV
our
shows.
royalty. That's our royalty.
Exactly. And so people are trying to get big on TikTok, right? So I do think that there is a significant merit in getting representatives, especially seeing as they have been elected by the people, which is it's one of those things where I mean gerrymandering is so excessive in America that like were they actually though? Like not that I want to question the validity of elections because I understand that's a big
That's not what
thing.
this is about. It's
That's
not what
not what this is about. No, no, no. It's so I mean, we know that voting should be very, very easy. There should be a holiday around it. Like it is one of the most like integral acts, political acts that you as a citizen can take is participating in our elections under the guise that our elections are fully and completely democratic, which we know that like colored people of color experience significantly more difficulty voting. And so, there's all those conversations and all those caveats to voting that make it a little more complicated. But oh, hi, Peachy. Sorry, my dog wants to join. Hi, baby. Ultimately, I think it's really important to have representatives really start pushing for what we need. I think there is this sort of leftist uh, uh, mood, I guess you could say, rhetoric, narrative, what have you,
Um,
around like you do you. And it's like we can't do that anymore. Like
right.
we can't just you do you anymore. It's too individualistic. We need to think of a community. And in order, we have to make hard decisions as a community. Peach, I'm sorry, girl, I need you to move. Um so I think in all things considered, need may be a more complicated word in this circumstance, but I don't think it's necessarily incorrect because we're under such a time constraint with warming and taking political action to right these wrongs. Because at this point in time, it's not about being carbon zero with the climate. At the very least, it's about literally taking carbon out of the atmosphere now,
Right.
like, which we absolutely have the means to do. Like, I'm sorry, we've put people on the moon, we've put shit on Mars. We can absolutely design technology and other stuff that would make so many jobs and so much job security because it's renewable energy. And like once it's established, you'll be able to have people who are performing maintenance on it. And like it's just, there are incredible things that representatives can bring forth with the whole push of people who put them into that place in the first place behind them, that absolutely draws attention to the necessity of change that we need to enact. So I hate to do that because I really like, I feel like our public servants have so veered away from actually being public servants in so many ways. Not all of them. Some of them actually wear their role very, very well. But I do think, unfortunately, with the way our society is and how we put people up on a pedestal and listen to the words that they say, there need to be people in big places with a lot of influence putting forth these motions and these ideas for it to really gain traction. I do think that there's something to be said with these grassroots movements where people really like, I mean, that's, without it, there would be nothing. Like, without, even if a celebrity went and said, hey, do this, if there was nobody with the movement pushing behind it, it wouldn't matter what they say, no matter how famous. So I think it
Right.
kind of has to be a marriage of the two
You think
because
you're
of the way
gonna?
our
You think you're
society
gonna?
is.
You think you're cut out for it? You could go into.
Oh gosh, I don't think I'm well known or liked enough for it, frankly. I need to be either incredibly sexy as a woman or very mysterious and desirable as a non-binary person to mystify the right to mystify the right wing enough that they'll feel the need to even listen to me, even if it's just hate listen,
Right.
but not totally tune me out because I'm not interesting enough in some way, shape. You know what I mean? It's like
Right.
it's this weird, it's this weird relationship you have to form because it's
What about
so
the?
dichotomous.
What about? I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Please,
What?
I'm
What?
done.
What about the um relationship between the particular struggle of Starbucks with the general kind of uptick in labor militancy? Like,
I mean,
seems like it's around. It's around.
uh, yeah, I mean, not to talk about the elephant in the room, but frankly, like police are basically, the protectors of the elite class against the proletariat. So like, I mean, it's just I mean, they protect and serve. Who, babe? Who?
Right.
Who do you protect and serve? You don't, it's
Exactly.
property. Like it is property. It's not meant to be emotional. It's not meant to make some sort of big moral argument about it. It is literally just the truth. Police were formed to capture slaves first. Like that's why they were formed. They were formed so that the elite class that owned slaves could basically pay a group of people to go and capture those slaves and enslave them again. Like that was why police were formed. And not a lot has changed since then. It just like not a lot has really changed. They're still there to protect property first and foremost. So I was talking about it and I don't know what's going to happen or like how to really draw people's attention to this these like blatant attacks on our freedoms and the erosion of what little humanity there was in our society to begin with, because I don't know if we're going to see something really big like the Dust Bowl or the Holocaust. I don't know if we're going to see something like the Civil War. I have no idea if we're going to see something that grand because frankly there are so many eyes around with TikTok and videos. Like it's just, there's so much out there, and I do think there's a lot more awareness than there was in the past, just because of the way surveillance is nowadays, be it just a typical TikTok video that's goes viral or what have you. But we're seeing these individual acts of severe violence everywhere that are absolutely being implemented by right-wing violent rhetoric. Like we can see that this is happening. We can see that certain idols in certain spaces, either a podcast space or some celebrities like Kanye West, like,
Oh,
all this stuff, they are, blabbing these dog whistles. And whether or not like a huge group is going to come and start gathering people into camps, whether or not that's going to happen, I don't know. But like, we're already seeing these acts of violence. We're already seeing these acts of dominance being played out. I mean, it's in groups that have already been under a lot
I
of
see.
attack in
Okay,
the
I see. I
past.
see what happened here. Uptick in labor militancy means not militant behaviors in
Oh,
terms
oh, oh,
of
oh,
the
oh.
right wing, militancy in terms of dedication in progressive politics. Although I'm not going to cut that out because that's a wonderful thing. Just just to restate
I
the
gotcha.
question, looking at the Starbucks struggle and thinking about things like the rail thing
Mm,
and this kind of larger context of it seems like everybody's going on strike. It seems like everybody's trying to do union stuff. Amazon,
mhm.
da, 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 da.
Yes, 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 yes. True.
Um, is there a way that you see that? It's like the opposite now. It's like instead of
Sorry.
everything collapsing,
Mhm.
do you see socialism? Do you see uh let's say the possibility for a mass movement uh anti-capitalist coming into view here? How serious um would you gauge all of these prospects? The hopeful ones.
Yes, yes, yes. I'd like to say it's pretty serious, mostly because I really don't see anything but a collapse happening otherwise. Um,
Nice.
so so it's kind of like it has to happen somehow. So I think what this makes me think of, a vast majority of Americans are in agreement about this. Like whether or not um these elections and the subsequent economic progress policies that are put in place by companies trying to snuff out union movements and organizing movements and what have you, a majority of Americans, a vast majority of Americans are relatively on the same page when it comes to, and especially because like we know this, like millennials and Gen Z are aware of this. We're not idiots. We can see what's unfolding before our very eyes. Um, with the whole being bottlenecked into college and then not having enough credentials to work a good job, or what stupid excuse they use to keep us in low paying exploitative positions, etc. So I'd like to believe that I don't think we've hit a point, unfortunately, where people are unsettled enough and are unrested enough. I don't know if it's the word, to
Restless
to
enough.
yeah, exactly. Like they are not settled enough and not content enough to really take massive action. I think we saw peaks of it in during the pandemic, and especially with like George Floyd. That was obviously about police violence. It wasn't about labor movements. But like it really brought to light these discrepancies that people face in our country that's supposed to be, equal opportunity for everybody. And we know it isn't. So I have hope. I have a lot of hope that we're going to get to a pretty big turning point in our politics, and especially with this push of the labor movement. But we're definitely going to see a lot of pushback before then. Like I think there's going to be a bigger storm that we're going to probably weather before really big change happens. I hope I'm wrong, but there's a lot of very powerful people with a lot of money
I wouldn't
who
hope you were wrong. I would hope that it would be time to fight. And the reason
yeah.
is because otherwise it seems like it seems like before this, and I'm from old Occupy days, but even before then, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
Everything was just in a total, like the neoliberal reality was ultimate.
Yeah.
And that's how you get this, like, what is it, what is the phrase? It's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism,
Oh my God.
right? So we have come through so much of that um reality and accepted it, and
Mhm.
this feels like an intervention in that, an interruption in that.
Yeah.
And if there's going to be a severe backlash, I'm like, yes, all right, it becomes clear, it
Mhm.
becomes something we can talk about, class war as such.
Mhm.
And I think that those are words, I know that those are strong words, I know that people, whatever, but it's true.
Yeah.
It's still true, right?
Sorry that the truth is big and painful,
Right.
but it is the truth nonetheless.
And so if they're gonna hit back, then then I feel like that gives you license to swing, and that's
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like they've been hitting us for so many years.
right.
Um, and I think really what's the changing point, sadly, is I think a lot of white people are like, I feel like people aren't being paid enough for their labor. And like everybody else who's been taken advantage of for decades is like, you don't think?
Right. Right.
So it's taking the people who have been in a position of privilege and have been able to ignore this slow, spiral into late stage capitalism.
Right.
And yeah, I think I really do think that we're going to be headed towards somewhere good. I really hope. I just don't have a big enough view of the world stage to see how many other moving parts are part of it. I would really like to believe that those of us, especially who are really determined to end the cycle of abuse, can actually end this cycle of abuse. And I'd like to think that it has its heart in the labor movement, because work, no matter what, even if everything disappears tomorrow, work has to be done one way or another. So this kind of insidious, hateful sentiment of like, what incentive will you have to work if those awful statements that they'll make about people, like saying like, there's no incentive to work, people just don't want to work anymore, all that. it's
Right.
it's it's like people don't want to work on stuff that doesn't mean anything, that doesn't
Right.
matter,
Right.
that's just
People
soul
don't want to
sucking.
do meaningless stuff. They don't.
No, like,
Right.
are you kidding? Like, of course people are gonna work. Like, how many? And I don't know. And I think that's what people are noticing, is that a lot of these older policies entrenching capitalism that perpetuate capitalism, are hateful. They're hateful, and they paint an insidious, hateful lens of humanity. And hate just can't keep it can't keep rearing its ugly head, and especially with a generation and generations to come that try to believe and live the actual truth of like, I want a better future for my kids. I want a better future for the people after me. If you truly believe that, you can't let hate and fear and the unknown be your sole proprietor of this system. And that's what capitalism is.
Nice.
It's Yeah. So I'd like to believe that the true nature of the human spirit will shine through, especially since a majority of people are aligned. It's just a matter of dismantling the policies that keep in place the minority that don't want these things, that are hateful, that don't care about the well-being of society.
That question drives me mad as to why we should stop it here, just in terms of the recording thing. But
Yeah.
I first of all, thank you.
Oh my God. Yeah. I'm sorry I got off on a tangent on something that
No,
like
no, no,
wasn't
no, no.
related to what you
Please,
were trying to ask me.
please stack as many tangents on top as you have to. Let's. I hope that this is not the only time we're going to talk. I hope
I
that.
agree. I would hope not the same, because it's fun to talk about it. I've been talking about how I've been wanting to work with the environment like not my whole life, because I just didn't know any better for a long time. But oh, you just hit your little noggin. Um, but I've been really wanting to get into the climate movement. And when I started organizing, my union rep said like, oh, that's going to be rough. Like, at least there's optimism in the labor movement. That's what he said. And
Mm,
it's so sad when you think about it, because
mm, we will talk about this.
Yeah.
I'm gonna stop the recording here.
Okay.